Hello, welcome to the Aura podcast. I'm David Dew-Veal, founder of Aura, and I'm really pleased you could join us today. At Aura, we are passionate about making transport more inclusive and accessible. And in this series, we're exploring the connections between mobility, community, and lived experience, and kind of really making positive change in this space. I'm incredibly delighted to be joined by Emily Holzhausen, Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Carers UK. Today we'll be talking about caring, transport, and some of the amazing work that Carers UK are doing in this space. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I've got first-hand experience of being a carer, so it's a topic I'm quite familiar, albeit from my own perspective and experience of caring. And yeah, I'm really excited to understand more about the work Carers UK and Emily do.
Thank you.
You shared a stat that really struck me: 70% increase in the over 35 hours a week of unpaid care. What are the key drivers of that? I assume aging population, but I'd imagine there are other factors at play.
Yeah, there's aging populations, so people who are living longer with more complex disabilities, which means our family members are living longer, which is something that is very welcome. But we haven't necessarily had the same growth in the care and support that's needed to go alongside these changes in our society. And there's been a shift from hospital to home and longer stay institutions to the community. So this means, all in all, wrapped up, it means that families are providing more care. And it's likely to keep going in that direction as well, which is why there is a really strong moral and social imperative to ensure that families are supported. But there's also that economic side, because if we've got people who are juggling work and care, they need to stay in work for as long as possible for income, pensions, and a lot of them say they really, work is very important to them as well for social networks. So this is a hugely important topic that we need to get right for all of our population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And I think one of the themes coming out here is around the invisible economy of care. I suppose supporting families, supporting communities, supporting the NHS as well. And there's a real juggle between the need to provide the care and then for carers working themselves as well. So it's a major juggling act. Often this can go unseen and it can go unheard. Why do you think that care sometimes is somewhat in the background, unseen, and how do we shift the narrative here?
Well, it's difficult. So if we were to put a figure on the value of carer support, it's £184 billion a year, and that's roughly the same as the NHS when it was measured. And the number of carers. So if you think there's just over 1 million workers in the NHS, we've got 5.8 million unpaid carers families. You're absolutely right. Health and social care would collapse without carers support. And of course, family support allows people to live, say, within families, live in the community, lead more independent lives, which they very often want to do, and be their best selves, which is incredibly important. So, I think Baroness Jill Pitt-Keithley, who was the first chief executive, my boss years ago, and is still in the House of Lords championing carers. She quite often described this, making this what is often a private matter into a public issue, and quite often it's a private matter. So people are very private if they start finding things harder to do. You don't always share difficult news with people in the community. People want to remain as independent and included as possible for as long as possible. And so, do you share that your son has had a psychotic episode, for example? Do you share that with people, or does that remain private? Do you share with people that mum or dad has dementia when you want mum or dad to continue to be in the community when there are such sort of negative issues, negative perceptions around mental illness, dementia, and a whole range of other areas? So people quite often keep things private. Within the workplace, for example, we find that too, that people often talk about children, but they don't talk about other caring responsibilities that they have. And let's face it, some people don't want to. Sometimes it's easier to keep these things private, certainly within my own family, not having to repeat difficult discussions all the time. When you see people, it's easier to keep that private. The challenge then is that people don't really know and it remains invisible. So, but that's one of the reasons why Carers UK exists. We've got some fantastic members who are willing to share either through research or people who are willing to share in the media, for example, because they want others to know what their lives are like and they want to achieve change. And, really, we can't do what we do without those amazing people sharing their experiences. And people do it up and down the whole land. People are engaging with local authorities, with health services, decision makers. But it's very hard for people to understand what it's like unless you stand in those shoes. And that's why we need sort of services, employers to be quite good at listening as well to the challenges that people have and making changes that improve people's lives. Because we don't want 1.2 million people in poverty. We don't want people having to give up work in order to care. We don't want people to be isolated or for their health to be poorer. We want people to have equity and equality of opportunity, really.
Of course. Yeah. And I think there are probably two bits that are coming out for me as well in that around identity. And as you say, people may not want to share, but people may not want to identify as a carer. I mean, I'm just speaking from personal experience, when my mum was my dad's primary carer, my brother and I were both kind of teenage boys doing our thing, I suppose. And we definitely didn't want to, at the time, be identified as carers. Whether that's right or wrong, that's another conversation. But that was the reality for us with it. I suppose the other thing that kind of I reflected on is around it's not necessarily binary as well, and there's a spectrum of becoming a carer with degenerative conditions and changing health needs and everything around that. So I suppose there's potentially when does someone sit down and say, okay, well, now I am a carer, and I think that can be quite challenging as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think you drew that out beautifully, that nothing is binary around caring. And I would absolutely agree with that people see their relationship first, son, daughter, brother, sister, close friend, partner, mum, dad. They see that relationship first. And this term carer, some people actively don't use it and don't like it. And others lean into it because they feel that gives them it defines their role. It tells others about the value of what they do in society. So there's a real difference, and there's co-caring that goes on, particularly in older couples, but also with people with learning disabilities and other people. Mum and dad. There's co-caring relationships, and I don't think people need to use a label. People don't need to use a label, but it can be useful because it can quite often click into different rights and entitlements. And if we're looking, for example, coming up to flu season, carers under the age of 65 can get a free flu jab. So, and that might be the thing that helps protect your health and the health of the person that you're caring for. If you say you're a carer, that clicks you straight into that. And in a way, it can be a shortcut to conversations. And it's helpful as well when people identify themselves as carers, if with it sounds very boring, but if you've got a questionnaire at work, a diversity questionnaire, and then you tick the box to say that you are looking after somebody with a disability or ill health, then the employer can aggregate that data and they can see how many carers they've got in the workplace who might need more support. So those kinds of identification, just because you tick a box doesn't mean you need to label yourself all the time, but it can be very useful. We find that people who take longer to identify as carers don't say they miss out on some of their rights and entitlements financially, but also practically. So that's why we would like people to recognise their role earlier. Whether they take the label on or not is up to them. But we want people to recognise their role earlier and ask for support earlier, because I'm sure you found this as well, David, that it's quite common that people put themselves at the back of the queue. They're so busy, really, just not always just looking after, but advocating quite often for the person that they care for. There's a lot of admin involved in caring, quite often in making appointments, arranging things, picking things up, at the carers' health, well-being, work, relationships will get put at the back of the queue. And there's quite often people feel guilty about taking time to look after themselves, and we say it's a bit like putting your mask on, in an aeroplane. Put your own mask on. You've got to look after yourself. If you want to continue caring, then you've got to look after yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean I think that's a really powerful analogy around the air mask, because I've got a 15-month-old baby slash toddler, so we've had a few flights, and when you're told, look, you need to put your own mask on so you can then look after the kind of infant or whoever you're with, I think that absolutely applies in caring. And I think there is like you say, there's the emotional toll, there's the administrative toll, that can be really heavy for people, and therefore actually negatively impact their capacity to provide the care that's needed within the family. I think your point as well really struck me around actually the identification as a carer. There are uses to it. There's practical uses in navigating kind of employment and support. But I think also within the family dynamic, actually, there's often a real blurring of roles of a family member versus a carer, and having some distinction and delineation around that can be really useful to actually protect the family side of things and the role as a brother or a son or a father or whatever that may be. So
I
yeah.
think that's put really well. That's put really well. I don't think I've sort of conceptualized it in that way. So yeah, that's it's a good point. Well made. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. So yeah, I suppose we've been going in from the macro in terms of some of the big trends and shifts as we set it out at the start, into the individual experiences of carers. And over your time working in this space, what have you learned about, I suppose, the emotional reality of caring, that is sometimes maybe missed in the policy narrative?
Yeah, I think the emotional side quite. I think you're right. I think it quite often is missed, and it can be really tough. It's emotionally really tough, and can take up all of your emotional brain space in a way, because depending on sort of what kind of caring you're doing, and it can impact on your mental health and well-being, as well as knock-ons to your physical health. It can be really rewarding as well, though. People talking about caring for parents, and that the parents looked after you, and now it's your turn to look after them. And even though caring can be tough, you still see rays of sunshine. Sometimes comes through. Heard not just our members, but also family members talk about, when somebody gets dementia, for example, you see the personality come back through, which is fantastic. And parents with disabled kids saying they're just some kids have just wonderful outlook on life that really can be really grounding, very grounding. So it's not always negative. It's the external environment that quite often creates some of these barriers and challenges, and life would be easier if people got the support they needed quicker.
Yeah, Martin Sibley. I don't know if you've come across Martin Sibley. He was a recent guest on the podcast, and him and I have spoken about the social model at length, and it's the barriers that actually cause the disability aspect. Keen also to pick up on your role and your focus. And as I was doing a bit of prep for this interview, I came across the Carers Leave Act, which felt like a huge achievement and a huge milestone. Could you take us inside that campaign and what took it from a good idea to something that Parliament acted on and was
Yeah.
into motion?
Yeah, well, I remember my first prep when I came into my job 29 years ago was a report on my desk called Carrying Costs, and that recommended 1 to 2 weeks unpaid leave 29 years ago, and it taken that long to get it on the statute book. So it's taken quite a long time to get rights for parents. And the rights for parents, I know there's more we need to do, but they're much better developed than they are for unpaid carers. So it has been a long journey in gathering evidence from carers about how they want to stay in work, how it's important to them financially. And then the most important voices here have been the employers, and the employers leading the way. So Centrica, for example, has been working on this kind of thing for about 25 years and has been a real leader in their field. And without them proving the case that actually supporting employees improves, their ability to stay in work, the costs of having to recruit staff as well. So people like Centrica, Phoenix, TSB, HSBC, they're walking the walk and providing the vital evidence to show government that it actually this is really important, that we're losing valuable staff skills and expertise. It's been a very long journey, and when we didn't get it into, we were expecting an employment rights bill and it didn't come under the last government. And then when the private members ballot came through, and Wendy Chamberlain got a very high spot. She's a Lib Dem MP for East Fife, so she took it on, championed it, worked across all parties. Government then obviously supported, and we now have these rights which affect, nearly 3 million people are juggling work and care. It's hugely important. It's across Great Britain, so we still have to get those rights in Northern Ireland. Really critical. It's a beautifully drafted piece of legislation. It's very flexible, so it understands about all different types of disability and takes that on board. So when it talks about long-term care need, they don't mean a couple of years, they mean a couple of months, really. And because you can't predict that, it's kind of like, and it's a day one right as well, so you don't have to wait 6 months before you've been in a job. It starts as soon as you get in. So for us, this is transformational because it's hard. It's very hard to make a case for unpaid carers, and this affects people, particularly women, who are much more likely to care, particularly in the 45 to sort of 64 bracket. Where do we want to go? I mean, unpaid leave. We're delighted with the rights, but oh my goodness, what a difference it would make if it was paid. This is really critical for women in particular. We've got gender pay gap, gender pensions gap, and low earners, people on low wages, can't afford to take that unpaid leave. So to turn it into a reality, we need government to go that next step and to make it paid, and find some sort of way of recompensing employers, so that employers are not necessarily footing the bill, that they can always, but government finds a way to do that in the way that they do for other elements of time off, like sick leave or mat leave or something like that.
It sounds like the momentum is there, and convening the, I suppose, large employers has been a really key part of that progress that's been made. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. You also touched on transport earlier, and I suppose the role transport has to play in caring. Of course, that's what we're about at Aura. That's the service that we provide. So I mean, we know that transport and mobility are kind of huge enablers of independence for both disabled people and for carers. How do you see mobility? How do you see transport fitting into that kind of wider care network and ecosystem?
Oh, it's hugely important. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you look at public transport or private modes of transport. If you have barriers in place, people are just trapped in their homes. And this makes it infinitely more difficult for family members as well. And it affects people's well-being and mental health. So I talked a little bit earlier about the 1994 Disability Discrimination Act, and I really started to see changes in the physical environment which made a difference. And I mean, it's not. If I take one case, for example, of one of our members, she and her husband now have a motability car and they live in a rural area, but beforehand they didn't. And he's a wheelchair user. He has cerebral palsy, and they would rely on buses to get places. And in rural areas, those are being cut back. There's quite a sparse timetable, so really challenging, or having to take taxis. Which, again, if you're looking for an accessible taxi in a rural area, that can be quite challenging. My own experience as being with colleagues waiting for accessible taxis sort of back in the day, it would be really, really challenging. So we couldn't go places. I mean, it's simple as that. You're trying to get somewhere to have a meal together, and then you can't because the transport doesn't come. So it's absolutely fundamental. So we have definitely feedback from families where accessible transport is like the key that unlocks independence and family life, really, in lots of ways. We have a fair bit about the costs of transport, and that splits into two ways. So for someone very low incomes, public transport still costly. For carers, they have additional transport costs sometimes if they don't live with the person they care for. So they're travelling, petrol costs, for example, having to get to and from, and that's not factored in, and that can be quite significant. So it comes up regularly in the research that we did, and we were also part of accessibility discussions, particularly during COVID, because of people's fears of safety on public transport, which was hugely important to get right for neurodiversity as well as physical disability.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot you've articulated there, which is exactly how we think about it. I suppose the transport being the key to opening up opportunities. You mentioned dinner with friends. It could be work, it could be education, it could be healthcare, and the additional costs and barriers that kind of sit around it. You also mentioned mobility, and that's where I started my career, because my family had a mobility car growing up, and it was a key. It was an absolute key, as you said, but. One of the stats that struck me not long after I joined Motability, is around a third of the customers, as in the disabled people, the disabled individuals, are not actually registered to drive the vehicle themselves, and that is undoubtedly due to mobility challenges and accessibility challenges. But the flip side of that is the it's the carers that are doing a lot of the driving of those vehicles. Actually, it's the carers that are interacting with Motability as much as the person who's in receipt of DLA or PIP. So it's yeah, as you say, it's really key from a kind of carer's perspective as well. I think one of the things that we're looking at a lot in this space is around technology. It's around AI. There's all of the trends we're seeing in electric vehicles as well, and how it all kind of is converging in transport. Is that an area that's featured in your research in this space of care as UK? I suppose
Yeah.
or worries you around some of the technology we're seeing and how it's developing.
Yeah. So huge potential, absolutely huge potential, to use AI. If I think about how friends, colleagues book transport, for example, and book accessible transport using different apps, that is easier to do potentially. But AI more generally, the ability to curate information for people is hugely important, and in the home, people using it every day without realizing. If you've got voice assisted technology, there are challenges though. I think, and certainly what comes up through this is frustration when any kind of digital interaction is not really user focused, and particularly if you've got disabilities and you've got sort of different aspects you might want to. You sometimes need a human. You sometimes need a knowledgeable human, and that frustrates people. It's also part of consumer rights. We see a little bit of fear about security and safety in terms of scams and trust. Great AI is fantastic. Using AI for the wrong thing or badly constructed is very annoying. Where we see potential is things like the NHS app for people to do more over time and have more control over appointments, bookings in secondary care as well as primary care. If we have a little bit more control ourselves, we're able to fit that around the individual aspects of our lives. So I see that as very positive. But I suppose my final point is about digital poverty and inclusion, and that to have proper inclusion, we need everybody to have, good, super fast connections. We need people to have data, and to have the hardware in order to connect. Otherwise, we're just increasing the digital divide between people who have and then people who find it harder or even have not. And it would be such a positive equality step. I think one of my friends recently said, she works for Mencap, and she said if you build with learning disability and other disabilities in mind from the base up, you make things accessible for everybody. It's really, why. So I think learning from good UX is kind of where we need to go.
Agree. We talk about that a lot as a team and as a kind of ecosystem, as a sector. It's kind of, if accessibility is considered at the outset, it becomes one much more effective and easier to embed as the products are developing and services are developing. But also, if it's done properly, it benefits and supports everybody just by building better products and services. And I think nowhere is that more true than in the kind of digital domain and digital world around it.
Yeah, I think one other thing I would say, David, is there's also a risk that we get a proliferation of different specific tools. So you can be overloaded. You can have digital overload, and we'll need to see some sort of consolidation of different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge amount of pockets of positive innovation and development, but the real opportunity and challenge is stitching that together to maximise the benefit of it. And I'm definitely an optimist at heart, and I feel optimistic that innovation technology is converging, it is moving in that direction, albeit not to take it for granted because there's a lot to do. Yeah, conscious that we've covered a huge amount here, and I suppose moving towards the kind of close and wrap up of the conversation. Um, and I suppose picking up on that point around optimism and some of the weight that kind of people feel when they're caring as well. I mean, you've dedicated your career, a huge amount of your career, to something that is both emotional and demanding. What keeps you hopeful? What moments remind you that progress has been made and this is moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. There are definitely things I'd like to see solved, like carers' incomes improves, and it can be hard because you get told no because of some of the things you're asking for cost a lot of money. The thing that keeps me going are the fantastic people that I work with that give their time so generously, will unpaid carers, but also people in social care, in the employers that we work with, some of the businesses and services that we work with, the generosity of time, the willingness to be creative, the sharing and solidarity is incredible. And when we get those wins, we really celebrate them. We did celebrate Carers Leave Act. We celebrated when government raised the earnings limit on carers allowance. These are really, really positive wins, and we hold on to those and try and move forward because it's not always easy.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of celebrating wins and marking success, of which you and the team at Carers UK and people you work with have achieved so much over time. And just hearing a small amount of that today has been, yeah, really excellent. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time. If there's one message that you'd want kind of listeners to take away today, what would that be?
Okay, most of us will be carers at some point in our lives, and we would just say, see caring, make it visible, and do what you can within your power to make changes to make caring easier for people because we'll make everybody's lives better.
Brilliant. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing so many rich insights. I've really enjoyed this conversation and yeah, really appreciate your time and your expertise here. For our listeners, if you'd like to learn more or get involved, please do visit the Carers UK website. I would imagine you're on all the kind of social media channels as well that people can follow you on. And likewise with Aura, our website, openroadaccess.co.uk, has a lot of the kind of work that we're doing, and we're on all the socials as well. So really would encourage people to take a look if any of this has piqued their interest today. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next episode.
Thank you.